It's an interesting question, I think. Um, if Jesus was here walking around when Jesus returns, now, caveat real quick, when Jesus returns, there will be no doubt. You will know it's Jesus, right? We just spent the last couple weeks working through 1 Thessalonians on Wednesdays. If there's anything that's more clear from what Paul is teaching, don't worry. You haven't missed him. You're not going to miss him. It's going to be real obvious when he shows up. That's right. But perhaps a thought experiment nonetheless of, would you recognize Jesus? Now, I and many of you know well that I'm not a big country music guy, but it has been my pleasure and my challenge in much of my time in Pike County in growing in my appreciation for something that I don't have much experience in. And in the midst of me thinking about what we were talking about this morning, I came across a song that I actually thoroughly enjoyed. I shouldn't say actually, as if I was surprised by that. I'm sorry. By the Statler Brothers back in the 70s, that Johnny Cash actually did a version of not too long ago. And it's called "Would You Recognize Jesus?" Anybody know this song? Yes? Excellent. I'll take one. That's all. That's great. This was utterly new to me, and I loved it. Right? If you've never fed the hungry or given clothes to the poor, if you've never helped the stranger who came knocking on your door, if you forgot to send some flowers to sick and shut-in friend, well, you ain't helping none of these, then you ain't helping him. If you've ever seen some children playing ball behind a school, if you've ever watched an old man plowing ground behind a mule, if you've ever stopped and listened when you could not hear a sound, then, brother, you have met him because Jesus gets around. Would you recognize Jesus if you met him face to face? Or would you wonder if he's just another one that you just couldn't place? You may not find him coming in a chariot of the Lord. This is the part that I need context for. Maybe somebody can fill me in. Jesus could be riding in a 49 Ford. You can find him in your mama's eyes or in your daddy's face. You can find him always there to help you win the human race. You can find him in the mountains, downtown, or by the sea. And brother, here's hoping someone can find him in you and me. Would you recognize Jesus if you met him face to face, or wonder if he's just another person you can't place? You may not find him in a chariot of the Lord. Jesus could be riding in a 49 Ford. Would you recognize him in any kind of way? If Jesus was walking in our midst and among us, would he be someone that we welcomed into our community, or would we find him to be something not appealing and a problem that we wanted to go somewhere else? Hebrews challenges us in the idea that you must be people of such hospitality to any and all that come your way, because you never know when you are tending to, loving on, and receiving in your midst angels. They're not going to look like you. They're not going to talk like you. They may use some 50-cent words that they appreciate and have learned what they mean. They may like some good old country music that you have no idea what that stuff's like. They may smell a certain way, or talk a certain way, or act a certain way, or whatever else it may be. Are you open and ready? Would you recognize him in your own life? Are you seeking him in such a way, with such an openness and a willingness, that you are ready to receive in whatever way it comes? It is true whether they are children, or outcasts, or any other kind of thing. Are you so teachable? Are you so hungry? Are you so raw and so open that in any way, place, shape, or person, God can speak into your life? It's going to surprise you. It's okay that it surprises you. If it surprises you, it means you were paying attention and you were ready to recognize it. There's certainly been those times where my daughter has said something to me that's like, I have to write that down. It's very helpful. In the same way that the way that we conduct our Wednesday night conversations and discussions is geared in such a way that I'm expecting to receive something from you around the table and not just be like, hey, sit down and listen to me talk about the Bible. It's not that interesting. What is interesting is interacting with one another in such a way that we are ready to receive him, to recognize him, to have our hearts open to receive in the moments that he comes. I was just having a conversation before service now about what my experience with the Spirit of God has been, in that he comes and he tells me what's up, and either I listened or I didn't. Very often the second option. And in the moment, you come to realize, I missed the bus on that one. And you become very serious about, okay, you're still talking, I'm sure, so lay it on me. And he's not still talking. You missed it. And now it's a question of, are you going to stay in the posture of readiness and attentiveness for when it comes back around? Yes, he's gracious and good, and he's going to give me another shot because I messed that one up. But am I going to stay there and wait for it to come around and to speak once again to the thing that I was too haughty, too distracted, too prideful and in my own mind and thoughts to actually pay attention to what the Spirit of the living God was saying to me? Are you ready for those things? Or has your heart hardened against them in such a way that I don't need that from you? I've got it figured out. A professor that I've listened to teach a number of times, his name's Stan Key, has a phrase that he says a good bit that I very much enjoy, which is, if you want to mess up your theology, read the Bible. Because you'll get everything nice and figured out and squared off and just like, I get it. And then you'll read the Bible and something else will come at you and be like, now wait a second. That doesn't square perfectly with what I thought I already knew. And again, those moments come to shave. It doesn't mean it contradicts. That's not what I'm saying. It's not how this works. But it deepens in such a way to call us over and over again into a place where our hearts stay ready. Whether he's in the chariot of the Lord or somebody explain it to me, a 49 Ford. Was that a busted model? Was that a bad year for Ford? What? Just I thought that'd be a cool thing. I think I'm ready for that. I think I'd rather see him in that. I think I'd have a harder time receiving him in a Lamborghini. I know it didn't exist in the same way, but Jesus in a Bugatti just ain't gonna feel right. Glad I could help. I think I just made the quote book. We're continuing into the Gospel of Mark. And the question about the hardness of your hearts and the readiness to receive him continues to point us back to the same question that we've been asking the entire series, that I believe the whole Gospel of Mark is structured in such a way to try and press you into your answer. Who do you say he is? And so we finish up chapter 6 today. And I want to back up a little bit into where we ended last week. Last week, we discussed the fact that God works through our belief. That Jesus' desire in Mark 3 was that he was calling those apostles to be with him and to be sent by him. And in chapter 6, we see them finally sent into what he's calling them to go and to do. And through their faith, through their faithfulness, God works miracles and incredible things and teaches the things of Christ. And they come back and they're exhausted. And before they get a chance to really rest, we see it once again in the feeding of the 5,000. And I ask the question, who fed them? And the answer is the apostles did. They didn't multiply the loaves, but they did the work of reaching back into the basket and somehow continuing to see it multiplied. So Mark chapter 6, verse 30, just to touch back on the 5,000, because as we move into Jesus walking on the water at the end of the chapter, it references that story. So it's important that we have it in our context. The Gospel of Mark, chapter 6, starting in verse 30, the apostles gathered together with Jesus, and they reported to him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a secluded place and rest a while." For there were many people coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. They went away in the boat to a secluded place by themselves. The people saw them going, and many recognized them and ran there together on foot from all the cities and got there ahead of them. How well do you have to pay attention to a group of people moving around to be ready to see where they're going so that you can move at the drop of a hat to get there before they even get there? There's a comparison going on here. When Jesus went ashore, he saw a large crowd, and he felt compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. Jesus feels compassion for them. His heart breaks for them, especially because he realizes that they are like sheep without a shepherd. Many times in the Old Testament this comes up, especially in Ezekiel 34, this idea of God being the good shepherd, and that the people of God have been left in a place where all their shepherds are misleading them or not leading them at all. They're not doing their job, or they're busied with some other kind of thing, or they're leading them right off the side of a cliff, to use the analogy, rather than into green pastures where they can rest and be well fed. Jesus is looking at these people who are without good shepherds, who are feeding them, who are guiding them and protecting them and holding them accountable and seeing them placed into right relationships, and his heart breaks for them. And he began to teach them many things. When it was already quite late, his disciples came to him and said, "This place is desolate, and it is already quite late. Send them away so that they may go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." Does that sound like they had compassion on them? Right? Jesus' heart breaks for them, and the apostles' response is, "They're a problem and a burden. Go away." How often do you feel that way about other people? How often do you, I always think, my mind always goes, especially to the times that I lived in Atlanta, and how often it happens that a homeless person comes up to you and asks you for things. And as a person who lives in Atlanta, you come up with your rote and normal things to say that I will not have compassion on you because I don't have to have compassion on you. Go away. Right? Sure, the God of all grace has had grace and mercy on me and given me things that I don't deserve, so I certainly shouldn't give you things you don't deserve. Wait. This applies to all the things. We still treat our family that way and our friends this way and everything else in the same way, that no, I'm not going to have compassion on you. You're a problem. Go away. Again, comparison being made between Jesus having compassion on those who he has been teaching, who have made every single effort to recognize him from a distance and get ahead of everyone else so that they could learn and draw close to him in any way. Now, this is a problem. Send them away so that they can get something to eat. Verse 37, but he answered them, "You give them something to eat." How? It would take 3/4 of an entire year's worth of wages to feed this many people. Where do you expect to come up with that sort of money? Never mind, what sort of bakery is open right now with that amount of food? Remember, this is not 21st century America where we're situated in the middle of 4 Ingles. It's really weird. And that's not the only grocery stores. We can go to other grocery stores, and they're also filled with food. That's not the world they live in. Nor can we drive to get there with any sort of speed. Shall we go spend 200 denarii on bread and give them something to eat? And he said to them, "How many loaves do you have? What do you have to give them?" Well, the obvious answer that we all give is, well, not enough. And when they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. And he commanded them all to sit down by groups on the green grass. They sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. He took the 5 loaves and 2 fish. Looking up toward heaven, he blessed the food and broke the loaves. He kept giving them to the disciples to set before them. He divided up the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. They picked up 12 full baskets of broken pieces, and also of the fish. There were 5,000 men who ate the loaves. It means there were more than 5,000 people there. Right? And as we talked about last week, will you just give him what you have and trust him to multiply it, use it, and make it happen in the way that he wants to do it? Will you just possibly have compassion on the lowly, stinky, strange, foreign, upsetting, difficult enemy that is in your midst, to give what you have to those who need it, and just trust that God will make it whatever it needs to be in the moment? And see that it becomes so abundant that you'll have more than you know what to do with. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side of Bethsaida, while he himself was sending the crowd away. After bidding them farewell, he left for the mountain to pray. We'll find this out in a moment, but the disciples haven't quite figured out what the heck just happened. And as we talked about 3 weeks ago, of the amazement and the awe and the fear that comes as a result of Jesus calming the waters and then healing the woman with the bleeding issue and raising from the dead Jairus' daughter, and Jesus' own amazement when he goes back to his hometown and can't bring about those same kind of miracles because of the utter lack of faith and defiance against him. It's the same kind of amazement that the disciples suddenly find themselves in, it seems. Because you need to go away. I just imagine them standing there with their full baskets, with their jaws wide open and going, okay, so this is the moment that you just take over the world, right? It's like, you need to get in a boat and go away. Take over the world. That's right. Never mind the awful reality, too, in which that like they had to be spanked in some sense to actually do what they needed to do. And now the other possibility, too, is that the crowds are looking at them like, wow, how did you do that? It's like, no, you didn't even have compassion on them. Go away. I will send them away. I will dismiss them. You need to go and handle yourselves on your own. Immediately, the way is being pathed once more. And Jesus goes on his own up a mountain to pray. He does this all day. We don't do that enough. When it was evening, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. Seeing them straining at the oars, for the wind was against them, at about the 4th watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. It's already evening. Jesus has gone up on a hillside or a mountain. It's not that he has some divine binoculars to be able to see what's going on. They've made their way into the middle of the sea, and Jesus is up on a hilltop and can see these poor guys working against the current, against the wind, to try and work their way across this very large body of water. And they're not making very much progress. It's the 4th watch of the night, which means that we're somewhere between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. Which means they've been rowing for at least 6-8 hours, and they ain't getting nowhere. The word used to say that they're straining is the same word that's translated when somebody is in torment. They are in pain. They are in great suffering and torment as they are doing everything they can to essentially stay in the same spot on the water, and they're not getting anywhere. And Jesus is just watching this from on high. I don't use on high as tongue-in-cheek. I think that's actually what's going on. I think there's a point in Mark's story to tell you who Jesus is in this moment. But he's gone away into his seclusion to bring himself into that right relationship with what matters most. Jesus lives that way constantly. Do you? Do I? Well, they're struggling, quite frankly, dying at the oars. And so he goes to help them by walking across the water in order to come out to them on the boat. The story's told differently in all of the Gospels in some sense. Matthew's the only one that's actually going to tell the story about Peter getting out of the boat and trying to walk on it. I think that does beg the question somewhat to say, well, wait a second, wasn't Mark delivering the eyewitness account in some sense of Peter? Why didn't Peter put it in the book? We're kind of guessing and throwing things into the dark here, but I tend to think that there's a sense of humility in the midst of that. I don't think, in all of the stories we have about Peter, that he is shying away from his own stupidity or his own failures. He seems to have learned the really wise understanding of you should lean into those and just be an idiot for Jesus. Amen, anybody? That's me. But rather, there's a sense in which, no, I want you to pay attention to who Jesus is, and rather than what Jesus did through me or for me, and that maybe it was actually a very intensely personal moment for Peter, and not something that he thought needed to be, I don't know, we're guessing in many kind of ways. In either case, it isn't here. What is here is a phrase that's in none of the other Gospels. Jesus is making his way across the water, walking on top of the water, which is not a thing. How many times have you heard this story in one way or another? So many times that when I tell you Jesus walked on water, that does nothing to you. Duh. I know that. That's amazing. That's incredible. That's impossible. What is happening right now? The God of the universe, the one who made the water, is now walking on the water. That makes sense. And there's a sense of awe and incredible just response that we ought to have to hearing this text read to us and reading it to ourselves. He is walking on water, and that is incredible. And he's going, again, out of compassion. Look at these poor schmucks. They're dying on the water, trying to row themselves into a single spot. They're not making any progress in any kind of meaningful way. Let me go try and help them, except for what the text says. That's right. Again, he's watched them, not really attentively. He's praying maybe, so who knows how long he's actually watching them. But in either case, the sun's going to come up soon. They've been at this all night. They're tired in a whole nother way. Don't forget either that they just spent a whole length of time in twos, going around, trusting in whatever sort of provision they may find in order to perform miracles, which I can only imagine how exhausting that is, in order to just stand up. It's one thing to stand up in front of a group of people and preach. It's one thing to get up and pray and just say some things and share some things. I just think it's a whole other thing to be in front of a group of people and to lay hands with an expectation that something's going to happen, and it happens. And it probably didn't always happen, but you did it anyway. And just training. And they hadn't had time to eat. They hadn't had time to rest. And Jesus says, great, let's go be by ourselves in order to do this. And 5,000 people beat them to the resting spot. And now they're serving them rather than being served like they were planning on doing. And now, on top of that, they're trying to row themselves across a storm. That's the situation, in case you didn't get the fullness of it. And Jesus is walking across the water, walking across the sea, verse 48, and he intended to pass them by. He intended to pass them by. There's two ways that this is generally interpreted. Either Jesus had no intention of actually passing them by. This is a translation thing. And the disciples think that he's just walking past them. The text says that he intended to pass them by. And so another thought may be that Jesus is looking to inspire, encourage, and help them along by moving past them. Be like, watch with what ease I'm doing this. Recognize who I am and what I've called you to do, and find some depth within you to keep moving as I've called you to do so. It's the reason that we read the text from Exodus 34 this morning. Moses has gone up on the mountain after Calfgate, after everybody's messed all of this up and created this great controversy of making an idol when they were exactly not supposed to. And Moses goes back up to the mountain in order to intercede on their behalf And in the midst of all of that, says to God, show me your glory. I want more of you. You can't see me and live. Here's what I'll do. I'll hide you in a rock, and I will pass by you. And then this character of God is stated in Exodus 34:6 that is said throughout the rest of the Old Testament. I am the Lord, the one who is compassionate, merciful, but doesn't withhold justice and judgment. So maybe that's what's happening. Is that in the same way that Moses was being passed by the very presence of God, so too Jesus was passing by. Either way, they don't know what to do with it. It's a spirit walking on the water. Ah! And so they cry out. They're afraid once more, just like they were afraid to begin with the last time they were on a storm and Jesus was taking a nap. Do you not care about the fact we're all going to die? When they saw him walking on the sea, they supposed it was a ghost and cried out. For they all saw him and were terrified, but immediately he spoke with them and said, take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid. Then he got into the boat with them, and the wind stopped, and they were utterly astonished, for they had not gained any insight from the incident of the loaves, but their heart was hardened. How do you not get it yet? I mean, that's kind of what we say to them in general, isn't it? What takes 8, 9, 10 months of planting and reaping what was planted in order for me to then grind it into flour and bake bread and everything else so that I can provide food for hungry people, to go out on the sea and fish and bring these in and prepare them for people to eat? What takes forever for me to prepare, Jesus did in a moment. How do you not get who he is? How do you not get the gravity of what's actually going on? And how do you not recognize who's standing before you? It's because their hearts were hardened. We can go to lots of different places to talk about this. I'm in trouble and already out of time. So, Deuteronomy is one of these, as well as Colossians. There's tons of them, really. That we must have an expectation. In Deuteronomy, Moses calls the people in preparation to go into the promised land and says, look, you have choices. Blessing, curse, life, death. For the love of God, choose life, choose blessing. But you're not gonna. Because what needs to happen to you, he says in Deuteronomy, is your hearts themselves must be circumcised. There is an extra skin wrapped around it that needs to be torn off so that your heart won't be covered up and hardened. Ezekiel uses similar language in Ezekiel 36, that God is making a promise for a new covenant that he will give you a new heart, to take away your heart of stone and to give you a heart of flesh. One that is sensitive, one that is alive, one that is ready to recognize what is going on before them. And Paul picks up on this in Colossians chapter 2. Speaking of Jesus, for in him all the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form, and in him you have been made complete, and he is the head of all rule and authority. And in him you were also circumcised with a circumcision made without hands, in the removal of the body of the flesh by circumcision of Christ, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised up with him through faith in the working of God, who raised him from the dead. Their hardness of hearts. Their hardness of hearts is not something that is like, well, they should get it by now. You doofus, don't you see what's going on in front of you? He's the Messiah. They know who he is. They're following him and surrendering to him and going and being sent out in his authority to go do incredible things. There's a sense in which they know who he is. But what Jesus accomplished has not yet been accomplished. His revelation of the enthronement of God on a throne that is unlike any other throne that we expected, on a cross, pouring out his blood to bring about this new heart and this transformation, that we may have compassion as he has compassion, that we may be merciful as he is merciful, that we may be human as he is human, to bring us into this new and right and perfect humanity that we were discussing in our Sunday school hour. Jesus lays this out in the Beatitudes, that this expectation of who we truly are in him comes from this circumcision that is done in us. And the disciples have not yet had that. They have everything else. Jesus is teaching in parables and then pulling them to the side and being like, you still don't get it. Straight at you, let me teach you what I just said. At some point, you got to start picking up on what's going on. He just multiplied bread and fish. Why am I surprised if he's walking on the sea? He already told the sea to shut up earlier. But it just keeps growing. It keeps getting more difficult. It keeps getting more real. And it gets more and more difficult to recognize him because of how incredibly divine, transcendent, and just out of this world Jesus is bringing all of that into our world in a way that's right in front of us. And can you imagine it actually being that real? Can you recognize that the world we live in now is actually more impossible and incredible? Because we don't get to see him or touch him or hear him. Yet we're filled with a power that filled him. We know an intimacy even greater. When they crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret and moored to the shore. When they got out of the boat, immediately the people recognized him, and ran about the whole country and began to carry here and there on their pallets those who are sick to the place they heard he was. Wherever he entered villages or cities or countryside, they were laying the sick in the marketplaces and imploring him that they might just touch the fringe of his cloak. And as many as touched it were cured. It's interesting, isn't it? The people recognized him from far away and ran ahead of him in order to get there before he even got there. His disciples, who have been with him the whole time and have seen his own power work through them in incredible ways, go out on a boat and see him walking on the water, and it must be a ghost. They come to the other side, and immediately all of these people, in their own desperation and brokenness, recognize him immediately. I started with that question because, quite frankly, the closer we get to him, the harder it becomes. You would think it'd be the opposite. I know my wife's voice very well. If I hear my wife's voice, I will know it's my wife. In the same way that if I hear my children cry, not only will I know that it's my child, I will know whether or not it's a concern. Or whether it's like, he's fine. The more intimate I get with someone, the more I should recognize him in the first place. Sure. Unless the more and more you get close to him, you realize there's more and more you don't know. There's a hymn that I very much love. The longer I serve him, the sweeter he grows. And I grow closer to him, and yet there's more to grow closer. The longer that I serve him, the more incredible that service becomes. The longer I suffer for him, the more I rejoice in that suffering. The longer I learn and study and grow closer to an understanding of him, the more I realize I know nothing. Their hearts are not hardened because there's something wrong with the disciples. Their hearts are hardened because what they're seeking to appreciate and understand is something that cannot be fully appreciated and understood unless the work of the cross is finished and the Holy Spirit is given. And yet we have that now. Will we recognize him? Will we turn to him? Will we yearn for him? We sang a hymn in our closing of our Sunday school, and we'll do that during communion today. It's an old Charles Wesley hymn. And I think as we read it together and as we sang it together, we all felt incredibly convicted by it. So all the more reason for us to share that with one another again. It's called Sinner, Turn, Why Will You Die? God, your maker, asks you why. God, who did your being gave himself that you might live. He, the fatal cause, demands, ask the work of his own hands. Why, you thankless creatures, why will you cross his love and die? As we grow closer and closer to Christ, we are called over and over again into a place of whether or not we will recognize him, of whether or not we will turn to him. As moments come of brokenness and fallenness and fear and confusion and whatever else, I am continually met with a question, with a challenge, with a choice. Will I turn my eyes to the heavens? Will I turn myself to Jesus to look full on his wonderful face and see everything else just fade out into the distance so that I may enjoy him entirely? Or will I resist it in some sense that my heart becomes hard? Because it's just too much. I'm too exhausted. This is too painful. This is unacceptable and wrong, or whatever else we tell ourselves in that excuse. Turn, you sinner. Why will you die? Christ has made the way for you entirely. He's called you deeper into a life of you. This isn't a saved, not saved kind of conversation, which is a stupid conversation in its own right, but this isn't what's happening. Christian, why will you choose sin instead of life? Christian, follower of Jesus, why would you choose curse instead of blessing? Don't harden your heart against the sacrifice, against the calling, against the challenge, against the infinite, overwhelming, transcendent reality and holiness of God that you're called to live into. These are the words of the author of Hebrews, quoting from numerous places in the Old Testament. Speaking of Jesus as our high priest, he says, therefore, just as the Holy Spirit says, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts, as when they provoked me, as in the day of trial in the wilderness, where your fathers tried me by testing me and saw my works for 40 years. Therefore I was angry with this generation and said, they always go astray in their heart, and they did not know my ways. As I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. So take care, brothers and sisters, that there not be in any one of you an evil, unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God, but encourage one another day after day, as long as it is still called today, so that none of you will be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. For we have become partakers of Christ if we hold fast to the beginning of our assurance firm until the end. Today, if you hear his voice, don't harden your heart. Don't turn away. Turn toward him. Allow that to wash over and overwhelm in all of the ways that whatever is not of him and not moving toward his glory and his love and his holiness in your life, I don't need it anyway. Turn toward the Savior of the world, to the God who has made you, who loves you, who has called you. into a life with a new heart, into a life of perfect rest.